He showed his great love to us by sending Jesus to die for us on the cross, to cover all of our sin, and to forgive us. This was his choice. Welcome to another episode of Living Life in Tune. I'm your host, Adam Lee. This is the show where we're talking about keeping things in tune in our life one day at a time. Things that I think matter, like faith, purpose, leadership, personal growth, manhood, all these things that, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, we are keeping them in tune. We're getting better and better every day. And remember, this podcast isn't for people who have it all figured out. This podcast is for people who want to grow and want to keep getting better, keeping life in tune. So this is episode 12. I'm finishing my Lost Arts series, and we are going to cover the lost art of forgiveness. Now, this is a tough one. Forgiveness is equal parts a no-brainer and equal parts the hardest thing that we have to do. It's a no-brainer, but it's also the hardest thing that we have to do. I want to talk, as it relates to forgiveness, about forgiveness as a choice. Okay? We'll talk about how he chose to forgive us and how we have to choose to forgive others. And then we'll talk about forgiveness as a process. It's a misconception that forgiveness is a one-time moment, just a moment in time where you forgive somebody and then it's one and done. That is not how forgiveness works. Forgiveness is a process. It's not a moment. The decision to forgive is a moment. There is a moment in time where we decide to forgive, but the actual forgiving and forgiveness, it's a lifetime. It takes a whole lifetime. It's a process. So the decision happens in a moment, but actual forgiveness takes a lifetime. And so I'll talk about that a little bit too. So starting off with forgiveness as a choice, all right? We need to talk about how first he chose to forgive us, all right? Adam and Eve in the garden, we fell short of the glory of God. We messed up. We sinned against him, and instantly he covered our nakedness. He made a plan to forgive us. He showed his great love to us by sending Jesus to die for us on the cross, to cover all of our sin, and to forgive us. This was his choice, okay? He didn't have to. So we'll talk about forgiveness as a choice, and we need to talk about him making the choice first. Romans 5:8 says this, that he showed his love for us, that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. So it was a choice of God. He made that choice. He demonstrated what it looked like, and he did it. Not only did he do it, now he's asking that we do it too. So part of forgiveness is realizing that he chose to do it for us first, and that we have to choose to do it for others next. He commands us to forgive each other. Colossians 3:13 says it like this, bearing with one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. Oh, snap. Now it's an expectation for those who follow Christ, for those who say they're Bible-believing people, for us in the faith community. Now we're commanded to forgive. Now it's his expectation that we forgive. Now it's our choice. He's saying the ball's in your court today. You need to make the choice to forgive. And you might say, well, Adam, I'm not perfect, or you don't know what they did to me, or there's no way I could ever forgive them for what they did or how they didn't show up. Or you say, Pastor Adam, there's just things you can't forgive in this world. And I'm telling you that it's your choice, and that everything's forgivable, and that everything I ever did, he forgave me for, and he forgave you for everything you ever did. So he chose to do it for us. Everything is forgivable, and we might not be perfect, because I'm not perfect. But check this out. I need to set this scripture before you today. Listen to this. 2 Corinthians 5:21. He who knew no sin became sin, so that we might become the righteousness of God. So you might be saying, I'm not perfect. Well, guess what? That's not an excuse. Jesus became your sin, took the punishment for that, and so that you could become the righteousness of God. So your response today is, if you are a follower of Christ, your response today is, out of his great love for you, now you choose to forgive others. So we've established it's a choice, okay? He chose to forgive you, and we have to choose to forgive others. And why do we choose? It's because he commands us to. It is a commandment of God to forgive. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's not just the right thing to do. It's his expectation on our life to forgive. And it must be done. It might be easier said than done, but it must be done. Nothing will hold you back more than unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is the devil's poison. If he can get you to hold on to a grievance, to harbor bitterness in your heart, if the enemy can trick you into not forgiving, he can hold you back from everything that God has for you in this life. Nothing holds you back. Nothing locks doors in front of you. Nothing burns bridges faster than unforgiveness. It is the devil's poison. So let's talk about it being our choice and how it's a process to forgive. First, we must realize the first part of it is going first. Okay, this is where forgiveness is really tricky because while we are still kind of irritated at people, or while we are still hurt or let down, we have to go first. Okay, he went first for us, so we have to go first. Forgiveness initiates a relationship. So think about your relationship with God. It started with him forgiving you. I don't know about you, but that's definitely how it started with me. He forgave me first. He went first. So in making the choice today to forgive, you got to go first. You got to be the first one to show up to the conversation with pie on your face, with eating humble pie and just saying, you know what? I am going first. I'm going to forgive you. He showed his love for us first. So he demonstrated that although it's not easy and although it's uncomfortable, going first is a big part of it. So I don't know where you are today on the spectrum of forgiveness and who you need to forgive and how deep the hurt was and how difficult the forgiveness might be. Going first is really a key part of this, going first. And then so remember what I said about decision, the forgiveness happens in a decision, but then the actual forgiveness part of it takes a lifetime. That's so true. The decision to forgive happens in a moment, but forgiveness takes a lifetime. So once you do decide to go first and you do make the decision, okay, I'll forgive them. The misconception is that all of your feelings of bitterness and hate and unfairness, the misconception is all those feelings will just go away. Okay, I made the decision that just go away. And that's not how it works. That's just not how it works. So let me help you out a little bit when it comes to forgiving people as a process and not as a moment. Because let's just say you've decided to forgive and you've made that decision today. Okay, I'm going to forgive them, or I'm going to work on forgiving them. I'm going to go first. Here's a couple things that you're going to set aside as practicing when you go to practice forgiveness, okay? Take a deep breath. You're going to set aside the right to hurt them back. Okay, once you've made the decision to forgive, let's talk about what forgiveness is. You're setting aside the right to hurt that individual back. Think about how that worked out with you and your relationship with God. He forgave you. He put Christ in your place, and he set aside his right to judge you back, to judge you again. Now that the blood of Christ is over you, you have become the righteousness of God, and he has set aside his right to hurt us back. So in forgiving others, we have to set aside our right to hurt them back. We have no right any longer to hurt them back. The tricky part of forgiveness is some people hurt us and they hurt us deeply. And some people might be telling us, well, you do have the right to hurt them back. That was not fair. And although we do have those rights, and I'll be the first to admit we have free will, and it might be your right to hurt them back. What they did to you might be so devastating that you absolutely have the right. But forgiveness is setting aside the right. We set aside the right to hurt back. Another thing we set aside is the right to bring it up in an argument. Okay, after we've made the decision to forgive, it does us absolutely no good to bring up the grievance in an argument. Here's the tricky part about that. If you get into arguments in the future with the person that you're trying to forgive, all of those hurts and feelings and frustrations are going to come back to you. You're going to feel what you felt. You're going to think what you thought. And you are going to be tempted to bring up how they hurt you in an argument. And here's what forgiveness is. It's setting aside the right to bring it up in an argument. Remember, you're making the choice to forgive. So you have no right to bring it up, and you have no right to hurt them back. You're surrendering those rights. See, forgiveness is a surrender. It's a letting go. And the only way you're going to make it through the process, you may have made the decision to forgive them, but the only way you're going to make it through the process of forgiveness is if you lay aside some of your rights. The right to hurt back, the right to bring it up in an argument. We need to learn how to wipe the slate clean like Christ wiped it clean for us. And I need to say this, Christ-like love is not a feeling. You're not going to feel like loving them. You're not going to feel like setting aside your rights. But Christ-likeness is a choice. It is not a feeling. So remember, you got to go first. You got to set aside some rights. And then the last thing I want to say is you have to know how to hold your position. Men and women, listen, you got to hold your ground. Remember that you made the decision to forgive them. And you're taking a position, all right? You're taking a stance. You need to hold your ground, okay? Because you're going to be tempted as time goes on to lose your position and to take more of a stance of bitterness or to take more of a stance of defensiveness. And as life goes on, we don't naturally drift towards Christ-likeness. We drift away from it. So it's very interesting to me that after some time passes, okay, let's just say you made a decision to forgive somebody who hurt you in your life. And it's a really difficult first couple years. You're working through some things. You're laying down your rights. You're reminding yourself that you're forgiving them. You're doing a great job. And sometimes it can feel like after 3 or 4 or 5 years that the ship has sailed. You did what you needed to do. The relationship is restored. It's all good. And then all of a sudden, you just wake up and you have a bad day. You have a bad thought. You're reminded, hey, remember what they did to you. They don't deserve your forgiveness, and they're unworthy of it. And sometimes these thoughts will blindside you years later, and you have to remember the position that you took. You have to hold your ground. You have to tell your thoughts. That's right. I said it. You have to tell your own thoughts the position that you're taking. Like, listen, not today, thoughts. I am in the position of forgiveness. I have made the decision to forgive. So hold your ground. Don't let the enemy take back what you've set your feet in. Hold your position. Remember, it takes a lifetime. You already forgave them, but forgiveness is going to work itself out for the rest of your life. It's not going to go away. You got to keep forgiving. Every day, you've got to keep forgiving. And you got to hold that ground. You got to hold that position. You'll have to wrestle with your own thoughts. You'll have to admit that you're not perfect. And you might even have to ask for your own forgiveness after you blow it. But listen, you got to hold your ground. This is part of our choice. This is part of us not being perfect. And you got to hold that position. Here's why. He's holding that position with you. God's holding that position with me. You know what? Today, as I mess up, he still loves me. He still forgives me. He doesn't shut the door when you make a mistake. He doesn't hold things against you when he's irritated at you. He doesn't keep a record of any of your wrongs. His arms are open wide, and he forgives you. He has wiped your slate clean. He forgave everything you did, everything you're going to do. And that's the stance he's already taken. That's the stance that he will take for the rest of your life. And that's how we ought to forgive one another. So listen, guys, I know I just talked through this like it was the easiest thing in the world, but I'm going to tell you it's not. Like I said, it's both parts a no-brainer, and it's equal parts the hardest thing that we've ever been asked to do, to forgive each other. But remember, nothing holds us back like unforgiveness. And if you're holding on right now to unforgiveness, I promise you, you're being held back from something. I promise you that God has more for you. I promise you that if you make the decision to forgive, more things will become available to you. Greater levels of trust, greater levels of grace, and your own personal well-being will be benefited if you make the choice to forgive. So you have to remember that it was a choice that he made for you first, and it's a command that we would forgive one another. And I don't want to see anybody be held back by something like this. I don't want you to drink the devil's poison a day longer. I want you to decide today to forgive, and I want you to work through the process of forgiveness by going first, by setting aside some of your rights, and by holding your ground. Hold your ground today. Remember, every step you take towards this, God is using it to transform your life, and he has great things for you to do. He has great things available and waiting on you. He's got doors to open up. He's got opportunities to pass your way. But he wants you to first go and make things right with your brother or your sister. To those who have wronged you in this world, he's waiting for you to lay down those things and to forgive them. And I know it's easier said than done, but it must be done. So I want to challenge you to do that. I'll be praying for you. It's not easy, but it's necessary. So that's it for this episode on unforgiveness, the lost arts. Remember this, guys, your life does matter, so keep it in tune.